The laughter started before she even set down her tray. Check the ink on the new girl. Somebody's been watching too many action movies. Petty Officer Second Class Dominic Reyes didn't bother lowering his voice. He never did. 12 years in the Navy had convinced him that volume was a form of authority, and authority was something he wore like a second uniform. He stood at the center of the Chow Hall at Naval Station Coronado, broad-shouldered and certain, surrounded by 6 men who laughed because he laughed first. The woman they were looking at was Specialist Amara Cole, 28 years old, Army transfer, technically attached to a joint training program that nobody had fully explained to anybody. She wore no unit patch, no rank tab beyond her specialist designation. Her natural hair was pulled back in a tight regulation bun, her uniform pressed to a standard that should have earned respect, but somehow earned the opposite. She was setting her tray down at the end of a long table when Reyes spotted the tattoo. It was visible for exactly 3 seconds. Her sleeve had ridden up when she reached across for a napkin, exposing the inside of her left forearm. Dark ink on deep brown skin, a design that was precise, deliberate, geometric. Something that looked almost like a compass rose, but wasn't quite. Beneath it, a string of characters in a font so small you'd need to be close to read it. Reyes was not close, but he had opinions anyway. No, seriously, he said louder, turning to perform for the room. That's a Pinterest tattoo, if I've ever seen one. Somebody's cosplaying special ops. He cupped his hands around his mouth like a megaphone. Hey, soldier girl, where'd you get that? The mall. 50 heads turned. Amara pulled her sleeve down, picked up her fork, started eating. That was the thing about her that should have been the first warning. She didn't flinch, didn't look up, didn't perform embarrassment for the crowd. She just ate her food with the unhurried precision of someone who had more important things on her schedule. Reyes took that as weakness. He was wrong. In the far corner of the Chow Hall, Chief Warrant Officer Terrence Holbrook sat alone with a cup of coffee he'd stopped drinking 20 minutes ago. He was 54, gray at the temples, with the kind of stillness that came from spending too many years in places where moving too fast got you killed. He'd seen the tattoo. Not all of it, just enough. His coffee cup settled back onto the table with a sound no one else would notice. But his eyes didn't move from Amara Cole for the next 4 minutes. The compass rose design, the specific placement on the inner left forearm, the character string beneath it. He'd seen that configuration exactly once before in a classified briefing 3 years ago, in a room with no windows and a roster that had more redactions than names. He told himself he was wrong, that it had been a quick glimpse, that tattoos looked similar all the time. He almost believed himself. The joint training program at Coronado was designed to create interoperability between Army Rangers and Naval Special Warfare units. In practice, it meant 2 weeks of everyone proving they were better than everyone else while nominally cooperating. Amara had been assigned as a technical liaison. Her file said she specialized in communication systems and signals intelligence. It said she'd completed advanced AIT, served 18 months in a logistics unit in the Pacific, and had been nominated for the joint program by a Colonel Whitfield out of Fort Campbell, whose name meant nothing to anyone at Coronado. What her file didn't say was extensive. On the first day of range exercises, Amara showed up with her own equipment bag. Standard issue on the outside. What was inside? Nobody examined closely enough. Reyes made sure she was partnered with him for the communications relay drill. His logic was transparent to everyone watching. Put the outsider with the loudest critic. Let the dynamic play out in public. Establish the hierarchy early. The drill required 2-person teams to set up a tactical communications relay under simulated field conditions. Time limit, 18 minutes. Passing standard, relay operational with encrypted handshake confirmed. Reyes set up his half in 11 minutes, which was fast. He'd done this drill 40 times. He knew the equipment, the frequencies, the authentication sequence. His confidence was earned, at least in this narrow domain. Amara set up her half in 6 minutes. Not almost 6 minutes. Not roughly 6 minutes. 6 minutes and 14 seconds, confirmed by the drill master's stopwatch, which he checked twice because he didn't believe the first reading. Her hands had moved through the configuration sequence without consulting the manual, without hesitation, without the small pauses and backtrack corrections that even experienced operators made when authentication protocols changed. She'd entered everything correctly the first time, including the rotating encryption seed that updated every 72 hours and that most personnel needed a reference card to input. Reyes stared at the confirmed relay indicator for a long moment. "Luck," he said. The drill master, a grizzled Navy senior chief named Pruitt who'd been running these exercises for 9 years, wrote something in his evaluation log and said nothing. That evening, Reyes found an audience in the barracks common room. "You know what the Army's doing now? They're sending diversity liaisons to watch how we operate. That's what she is. Somebody's quota." He leaned back, arms spread, feeding off the nods and chuckles. "She finished the relay drill fast because I did most of the heavy lifting. Let's be honest." 3 seats away, a younger SEAL named Okafor looked up from his phone. He was 26, new enough to still notice things that veterans had trained themselves to stop seeing. Pruitt logged her individual setup time at 6:14. "That's not your section." Reyes didn't miss a beat. "Pruitt's getting soft. Writes up whatever makes the numbers look good." Okafor looked back at his phone without responding, but his jaw had tightened. Holbrook heard the conversation from a hallway. He didn't enter. He walked past, slowly, and continued to the secure communication office at the end of the corridor. He had a call to make. Day 3. The field navigation exercise covered 6 miles of coastal terrain with 4 waypoints, each requiring a specific technical task. It was designed to be grueling. The terrain was uneven, the tasks were complex, and the time standard was aggressive enough that most teams finished with less than 4 minutes to spare. Amara finished 11 minutes early. What made people notice wasn't the time. It was how she moved through the terrain. Most operators, even experienced ones, followed the mental map they'd built from the briefing, trusting their memory and adjusting when reality contradicted it. Amara moved differently. She read the ground in real time, making micro-adjustments that weren't in any manual, anticipating obstacles 20 meters before reaching them, choosing lines through the terrain that looked wrong on a map but proved faster in practice. That was judgment, not training. The kind of judgment that came from doing this not in exercises, but in places where getting it wrong had permanent consequences. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Voss, the Army Ranger officer coordinating the joint program, watched from the observation point on the ridge. She'd been watching Amara Cole since day 1. Not with suspicion, with recognition. Voss had served a rotation with a Tier 2 unit in 2021. She knew what certain kinds of competence looked like, how it moved, how it breathed, how it stayed absolutely quiet when loudness would have been easier. She made a note in her evaluation log, encrypted it with a key that went above the joint program's classification ceiling, and sent up a chain that most people at Coronado didn't know existed. Reyes escalated on day 4. It wasn't subtle. The equipment inspection before the maritime insertion drill was his opportunity. As the senior SEAL on the evaluation panel, he had authority to flag any gear that didn't meet specification. He used that authority with a precision he rarely brought to anything else. Amara's communications kit was flagged for 3 separate issues. A SEAL integrity concern on her waterproof case. An antenna connector that Reyes claimed showed were beyond acceptable limits. And a frequency certification sticker that he said looked like it predated the current authorization cycle. Each flag was documented. Each required administrative review before she could participate in the drill. The review process, by design, would take at least 4 hours. The maritime insertion drill was in 2. Amara stood at the equipment table and listened to each flag read aloud. Her expression gave nothing away. No frustration, no protest, just that same flat, patient attention. When Reyes finished, she asked one question. "Is there an appeal process, petty officer?" "Sure," Reyes said, smiling. File a written request with the equipment officer. Usually takes 48 hours. Thank you. She turned and walked toward the administrative office. Reyes turned back to his team, already spinning the narrative. That's how you handle people who don't belong. Document everything, stay within the rules, and let the process do the work. Nobody laughed this time. Some of the newer personnel were watching the door Amara had walked through with expressions that looked less like amusement and more like unease. Holbrook was one of them, except his expression wasn't unease. It was calculation. He excused himself from the group and followed the same path Amara had taken, 3 minutes behind her. The equipment officer's office was small and smelled like printer toner and old coffee. When Holbrook arrived, Amara was already seated across from Lieutenant Dawes, who was reviewing the flagged items with the harassed expression of someone who'd been ambushed by paperwork he didn't generate. Holbrook stepped inside, closed the door, and addressed Dawes directly. I need a minute with the specialist. Dawes looked between them. Sure, Chief Warrant. I'll be outside. When the door closed, Holbrook sat in the vacated chair and studied Amara for a long moment. She studied him back. Neither spoke first. Then Holbrook leaned forward and said, very quietly, inner left forearm. Compass rose configuration. Character string, 8 alphanumeric. Amara's breathing didn't change. I've seen that design once before, Holbrook continued. In a briefing I wasn't supposed to attend, attached to a unit designation that got redacted from the official record 6 months after the operation it referenced. Silence. If I'm wrong, Holbrook said, tell me I'm wrong and I'll walk out of here and help you challenge Reyes's equipment flags through normal channels. Amara looked at him for 3 more seconds. Then she said, you're not wrong. The air in the room shifted. How long? Holbrook asked. This is month 7 of the assignment, and Reyes doesn't know what he's looking at. Nobody here does. She paused. Except now you. Holbrook sat back. His mind was moving fast, connecting things. A joint training program that nobody had fully explained. An Army specialist with skills 3 standard deviations above her listed profile. Equipment flags that conveniently removed her from a specific exercise. What's the target? He asked. I can't tell you that. Is it someone in this program? She held his gaze. I can't tell you that either. Holbrook nodded slowly. He'd operated in enough classified spaces to understand the shape of a conversation that had reached its boundary. He stood, straightened his uniform, and moved toward the door. The equipment flags are going to get resolved, he said, not looking back. I'll see to it. Chief Warrant. Her voice stopped him. I don't need the help. He turned. She was watching him with those calm, dark eyes that had been absorbing insults and mockery for 4 days without cracking. I know you don't, he said. I'm doing it because Reyes is a problem and I should have addressed it 3 days ago. That's on me, not you. He left before she could respond. The equipment flags were resolved in 40 minutes. Dawes, reviewing them with fresh eyes and no political investment, found that the seal integrity concern was within acceptable parameters. The antenna connector showed normal, were consistent with current certification, and the frequency sticker was entirely up to date. Reyes, when informed, said the review process must have been rushed. He said it to Okafor, who did not agree. Amara participated in the maritime insertion drill. She was partnered with a SEAL named Braswell who'd drawn the short straw and expected a difficult 2 hours. What he got instead was a partner who anticipated his movements, communicated in the compressed shorthand that took most operators years to develop naturally, and made 2 tactical decisions during the insertion phase that Braswell privately acknowledged saved them both from failing the objective scenario. Afterward, he said nothing to Reyes about it. He said quite a bit to Okafor. Day 6 brought the surveillance detection exercise. It was the most psychologically demanding drill in the program. Teams were given a target location and instructed to approach it without being flagged by the opposition force's 6-man observation network. The OPFOR were experienced. They'd run this exercise enough times to know every approach angle, every piece of cover, every timing pattern that trainees fell into. In 12 years of this exercise, no team had reached the target location without at least one observation flag. Amara and Braswell reached the target clean. No flags, no near misses that the OPFOR graciously decided not to count. Clean penetration of a surveillance network that had never been beaten. The OPFOR team leader, a master chief named Galloway, who'd run the exercise more times than he could count, stood at the target location and stared at Amara with an expression that moved through disbelief, professional respect, and something approaching awe in about 4 seconds. "Wow," he said. "The Eastern Observer breaks his pattern every 40 minutes, Amara said. 42 seconds of reduced coverage during the reset. We used the drainage channel on the south approach to eliminate the line of sight from position 3. The rest was timing." Galloway looked at Braswell. "Don't look at me," Braswell said. "She mapped all of it." The observation was quietly logged, quietly passed up the evaluation chain, quietly attached to a file that was already drawing attention in places that didn't make their attention visible. Reyes found out about the clean penetration during dinner. He spent 20 minutes arguing that the exercise parameters must have been compromised, that someone had leaked the OPFOR positions, that there was no legitimate way an Army logistics specialist with 18 months of routine service had beaten a surveillance network that SEALs with combat deployments couldn't crack. Most people at the table stopped responding after the first 5 minutes. Okafor left the table after the third. Day 8. The incident happened during the morning brief. Commander Derek Walsh ran the joint program. He was 41, measured, the kind of officer who chose his words carefully because he understood that words in command positions had weight. He'd been watching the program dynamics with growing concern since day 3, when Pruitt's evaluation logs had started including notations that didn't match the personnel files he'd been given. Walsh called the morning brief to order with all 42 program participants present. He was 3 minutes into the operational schedule for the day when the door opened. SEAL Commander Jason Riark entered. He was 50, silver-haired, with chest ribbons that told a story most people in the room couldn't fully decode. He'd commanded DevGru elements, advised 3 different combatant commands, and currently held a position in naval special warfare that had more influence than his title suggested. He was not scheduled to be at Coronado this week. He was not scheduled to attend this brief. The room came to attention. Riark told them to stand easy. He stood at the back of the room, arms loose at his sides, and let Walsh continue. But his eyes moved through the room with the systematic sweep of someone looking for a specific thing. They stopped on Amara Cole. He looked at her for exactly 3 seconds. Then his gaze dropped to her forearm, where her sleeve had ridden up slightly in the process of standing and relaxing back to easy. The compass rose, the character string, visible for barely a moment before she tugged her sleeve down. Riark's expression didn't change, but his posture shifted by approximately 2 degrees in a way that only someone who'd worked with him for years would recognize as significant. Walsh continued the brief. Reyes, seated 2 rows ahead of Amara, was already drafting a complaint in his head about the surveillance exercise results. He'd found a regulation that might support a formal challenge. He was planning to raise it at the end of the brief. He raised his hand when Walsh finished. "Sir, I want to formally object to the scoring on yesterday's surveillance exercise. I have reason to believe the integrity of the OPFOR position data was compromised, which would invalidate the results for team. Petty Officer Reyes." Riark's voice came from the back of the room. It was not loud. It didn't need to be. Reyes turned. Every head in the room turned. "Before you finish that sentence," Riark said, "I'm going to need you to tell me the basis for your claim." Reyes straightened. He hadn't expected direct engagement from a commander who had no stated reason to be in the room. But he recovered quickly because he'd spent 12 years learning to perform under pressure. "Sir, the exercise results were statistically anomalous. No team has ever achieved a clean penetration. The most likely explanation is what? Compromised OPFOR intelligence, sir." Riark looked at Galloway, who was seated to the left. Master Chief, was your position data secure? Yes, sir. Same protocols we've used for 4 years. Were your observers briefed on the approach angles before the exercise? No, sir. Standard procedure. They were from the position map only. Riark returned his gaze to Reyes, calm and absolute. So the explanation you're looking for isn't a compromised exercise. It's a team that did something your teams haven't done. He paused for 2 seconds. Sit down, petty officer. Reyes sat. The room was very quiet. Then Riark said, without raising his voice, Specialist Cole. Amara stood. Riark walked from the back of the room to the front. The crowd parted without being asked. When he stopped in front of Amara, he looked at her the way a craftsman looks at work he recognizes. Your left forearm, he said. The room held its breath. Amara held his gaze for 1 second. Then she reached across with her right hand, gripped her left sleeve, and rolled it up past the elbow. The tattoo was fully visible now in the overhead fluorescent light. The compass rose, precise and deliberate, its 8 points carrying something in their geometry that only certain people could read. The character string beneath it, and below that, barely visible at the inner elbow, a second element that hadn't been seen before. A unit designation in a format that wasn't Army, wasn't Navy, wasn't any branch that appeared on standard organizational charts. Riark looked at it for a long moment. Then he looked at Walsh. Commander Walsh, who authorized this specialist assignment to your program? Walsh checked his tablet. Colonel Whitfield, sir. Fort Campbell. The nomination came through standard joint program channels. Pull Whitfield's full title. Walsh typed. The answer came back in seconds. His expression changed. He turned the tablet so Riark could see it, though Riark had probably already known the answer. Whitfield's full title included a secondary designation that didn't appear in his standard biography. A 3-letter attachment that indicated a coordination role with a program that operated above the joint program's classification ceiling. Riark turned back to the room. I'm going to explain something, he said, in the same measured tone he'd used throughout. This program is classified at a level that most of you are cleared for. What Specialist Cole's assignment involved is classified at a level that none of you are cleared for, including me. He paused to let that land. What I can tell you is that the insignia on her forearm is real, it is authorized, and it represents a service record that makes everything I've seen this week look like exactly what it was. He looked at Reyes. Petty Officer Reyes. The equipment flags on day 4. The objection this morning. The pattern of incidents I was briefed on before I walked into this room. Riark's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. You spent 8 days using your seniority to undermine someone whose qualifications exceed your own by a margin you're not clear to understand. You did it because of how she looks and where she came from, and because her competence made you uncomfortable. He clasped his hands behind his back. You will report to Commander Walsh's office after this brief. You will begin the documentation process for a formal review, and you will spend the remainder of this program keeping your opinions about other personnel's credentials to yourself. Reyes's face was the color of old concrete. Riark turned back to Amara, and then he did something that made every person in the room go absolutely still. He came to attention, clean, precise, the full military posture of a 50-year-old commander with more combat experience than anyone in the building. He saluted her. The silence in the room had texture. You could feel it pressing against ears and lungs. Amara returned the salute without hesitation, without surprise, as if she'd been waiting for the moment to require exactly this. Specialist Cole, Riark said, dropping the salute. On behalf of Naval Special Warfare, I apologize for the environment you were asked to operate in. That's a failure of leadership that I intend to address. He glanced around the room. The rest of you might want to think carefully about what you've witnessed over the past 8 days. Not just today. Everything. What competence looks like when it's not performing. What patience costs. What it means to dismiss someone before you understand what they're carrying. He returned to the back of the room. Walsh called the brief back to order with slightly unsteady hands. In the 48 hours that followed, 3 things happened. Reyes's formal review began. It surfaced not just the incidents from the joint program, but a pattern extending back 14 months. Equipment recommendations that steered training contracts toward specific vendors. Performance evaluations that had suppressed 2 junior SEAL candidates whose files were now being re-examined. Nothing criminal yet, but the kind of institutional rot that turned a formal review into something longer and more serious with every document that was pulled. Okafor requested reassignment to a different team within the program. He cited a difference in operational philosophy. Nobody pressed him on what that meant. And on the morning of day 9, Amara Cole was gone. No announcement, no departure ceremony. Her bunk was cleared, her gear was packed, and the only evidence she'd been there was a single line in the program roster marked detached, operational requirements. Braswell found a note on his bunk that morning. 3 sentences. The drainage channel approach works on 4 other configurations in this terrain. I mapped them in the green notebook in the desk drawer. Use them when it matters. He read it twice. Then he folded it carefully and put it in his chest pocket. Holbrook sat in the chow hall that evening, the same corner table, the same cup of coffee going cold. He thought about the compass rose tattoo, about the character string he'd spent 3 days quietly trying to verify through channels that kept routing him to redacted files and polite dead ends. About a woman who had absorbed 8 days of contempt with the patience of someone who knew that endurance was the mission, not a cost of it. He thought about what Riark had said, what competence looks like when it's not performing. He'd been in the Navy 31 years. He'd worked with operators who were loud about their capabilities and operators who were quiet about them. And the ratio of loud to genuinely exceptional had never once surprised him. But every now and then, someone came through who recalibrated the scale, who made you look back at your own career and ask whether you'd been measuring the right things. He drank his cold coffee and stared at the table where Amara Cole had sat on day 1, pulling her sleeve down over the tattoo that had started all of it and returning to her food with unhurried calm while 50 people waited for her to break. She never had. 7 weeks later, a formal report from the Joint Program Evaluation was submitted to the Joint Training Oversight Committee. It cited the Coronado cohort as the highest performing group in the program's 4-year history by 3 separate metrics. It noted 1 anomalous result in the surveillance detection exercise. It noted 1 instance of exceptional performance in the communications relay drill. It did not name Amara Cole. Her name, by that point, had been removed from every document associated with the program through a process that required 3 separate classification authorities. What the report did note, in language that was deliberately dry and institutional, was that the program's leadership climate had resulted in formal review proceedings for 1 senior petty officer and that new protocols for contractor and transfer personnel integration had been implemented as a direct result. In a footnote, almost invisible at the bottom of page 47, was a single line that the evaluation committee had debated including it all. 1 participant's performance during the program period cannot be adequately captured within the classification parameters of this report. Recommendation: see supplemental file, access level SCI+. The supplemental file, if you had the clearance to pull it, was 30 pages long. The first page was a photograph. A woman in combat fatigues, left forearm resting on a field table, the compass rose tattoo clear in the image. Her expression was composed, steady, the kind of face that had decided long ago that the only audience worth performing for was the mission itself. Below the photograph, a single line of text. Specialist Amara Cole. Service record. See attached. Classification level. Above program parameters. Recommendation. Commendation. Citation to be held pending operational security review. And below that, handwritten in ink that didn't match the rest of the document, in the handwriting of someone who'd added it after the formal process was complete. She never needed the salute. She earned it before she walked in the door. The rest of us just took 8 days to see what was already there. No signature, but Braswell, who saw the file once, briefly, years later, recognized Riark's handwriting. He always said he wasn't surprised. Justice isn't loud. It's patient, and it was already inside the wire before anyone thought to loo.